Hey guys, welcome to KDLounge. Today we have a very special guest, Emily Pillmore. She's the Pact Language lead for Kadena. Hey Emily, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. This is my first official Kadena podcast, specifically about
Nice.
Kadena things. So I'm stoked to do this.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw a lot of stuff you did for Haskell. So if it's the first for Kadena, I'm proud that we're doing it first than anyone else. So before we jump into Kadena and all of that stuff, I wanted to try to get a little bit of about your background, how you got here. So if you can just go uh, do a small rant about how you got into what you're doing now.
Oh, into crypto or into tech or
Crypto, I think
just
crypto would be cool because probably not something you talk about a lot, right? So if you can go there that way, would be nice.
um okay. So originally, we can start this. Just after university, I ended up with a degree in mathematics, and I was looking for a job. And the only things available to me where I was, which was Salt Lake City at the time, were sort of back end financial office type jobs. So I ended up getting my first job at Goldman Sachs as an associate analyst, working on FX derivatives and sort of like options trading stuff. Um, I lasted about 4 months at that job because it really sucked. And I was commuting like an hour and a half by car every morning. And we started at 7 a.m. because, we wanted to be uh, at New York's 9 a.m. when we started. So it was just really terrible. So I was getting up at like 5 a.m. to go to work to make like 17 bucks an hour, which just
Yeah.
wasn't worth it. Um, and eventually I kind of stumbled into, so while I was on the job, I was a hobbyist programmer at that point. I had taken like one or two courses in university, and I was like, this sucks. I'm going to get a cushy sort of like software engineer job where I don't have to try as hard to show up on time, and maybe even get remote work. Hey, that'd be nice. uh, and I ended up teaching myself Java and OCaml and Scala,
Okay.
um, and eventually turning that into or in C++, and getting good enough at it that I could justify applying my math background and some of that knowledge
Hmm.
to a second job in New York City, where I happened to just score a position as a consultant for a place called Boston Consulting Group, specifically its tech wing, which was doing a lot of model validation and sort of white paper engineering stuff for various banks around New York City. And that was fantastic. Um, but still finance. I wanted that programming job. And eventually I made it my way to Bank of America, where I started working on the reference data pipelines and sort of core internal data infrastructure. And that's where I learned how to program in a functional sense
Okay.
for realsies this time, not just as a hobby. And eventually just, swapping back and forth as millennials do, every 9 months for a new job. I landed at a place called Disney, um, specifically a place called BAMTech, which was being acquired by Disney,
Okay.
working on very large distributed systems, or sorry, centralized systems that were highly distributed, rather.
Okay.
Working on sort of sports network stuff. So, how do you handle the real time data analytics and ad tech for things like ESPN? Things like Major League Baseball and NFL and that kind of thing. And that's kind of where I really um, solidified my knowledge of how to work on very large systems,
Hmm.
as well as get started with my open source work. I ended up maintaining the largest sort of functional programming uh, project in Scala, among other things. And eventually, for various political reasons, got really, really over the whole Scala thing very quickly, particularly due to my manager. And I decided, you know, forget it. I've heard about this Haskell community, and how they have great people. And there were some very Haskell adjacent people on the projects that I had worked on. And
Hmm.
I started asking around, kind of like, what am I going to do? How do I transfer my skills here? And they kindly taught me how to program in Haskell, and good enough that at a particular conference, I met these Kadena guys, and I said, "Oh, you know, shit, I know some of the names of the people that were doing the recruiting," and I was like, "I would love to work with you," and joined them in 2018. So it was just
At that
great
point,
fun.
there was no crypto experience in the mix.
None whatsoever, but there was a finance background. So I
Mm.
did understand the idea of what it means to be a currency and what it
Hmm.
means to be fiat versus sort of like asset backed versus cryptocurrency. But the Kadena guys weren't really focused on crypto knowledge per se. They were more focused on the blockchain as a distributed system.
Hmm.
And how do we get this nice distributed system up and running with these features that define it to be a blockchain, right? So things like decentralization and reproducibility and the sort of like general Merkle structures that compose it. Um, and I really appreciated that because it gave me room to understand more about the cryptosphere as a newcomer, and then eventually as somebody who knew more than a newcomer, as somebody
Hmm.
who worked on the blockchain, and then as somebody who could see the ecosystem as a whole growing from basically inception to launch over the course of uh, 2 years. So,
Okay.
and now, of course, 4 years later, I'm still here.
Yeah.
So,
Great story, great backstory. Um, and so you mentioned that you work with you transitioned to Haskell at some point, but
yeah.
what drove you to this kind of functional programming? Was this kind of an accident, or did you just try different languages and find that this type was more appealing than others?
Um, well, it was actually two things. I was actually a Perl programmer initially, just doing little
Hmm.
scripts for various Linux distributions that I had worked on, and I was the one person who was like, "Oh, I've installed Gentoo. Time to write a Perl script to automate my workflows." so, um, but one of the cool things about Perl is that uh, in many cases it was ahead of it, especially Perl 5 specifically. I'm talking about for Perl 5. It was very ahead of its time in terms of the idioms that it built directly into the language, not just the sort of like Perl var or Perl regex type stuff, but the fact that it included things like grep and map as a built-in function to the language,
Hmm.
things like which correspond with our map and our filter today. So things like map, filter, reduce were already there in the language for the most part, and
Hmm.
there were a few blog posts that were running around at the time uh, detailing how close for instance, like quicksort was with respect to a functional style in Perl and a language called Haskell. And that was where the first brain hooks uh, came in. And I also heard about people like Audrey Tang, who became a really big hero for working on the Pugs project and which is the Perl 6 compiler written in Haskell. And it was just kind of in the back of my head for 5 or 6 years. The other thing was my obsession with having programs that I didn't have to write more than once. So I am very, very lazy and I don't like doing a lot of things, and I don't have an infinite stamina for writing programs. So I want to do as little as possible all the time that gets my thought, onto running code, paper, whatever, as quickly as possible with as few revisions. And it seemed to me that a typed specification would be the quickest way to do that. And Haskell was sort of notorious for being the language where you can express what you mean to say in types and have fewer bugs at launch because you have bothered to actually specify the sort of concretions of what you want in the type language.
Okay.
Uh, sorry, in the type system. So um, that's it for the most part, and then varying levels of okay, I'll try OCaml because it's close and I can find a job in Salt Lake for whatever reason. But then it was Scala because, it's easier to find a job in Scala. And then once, the Haskell job started showing up, uh, got a job in Haskell. So
So basically, laziness drove you to Haskell.
pure, pure and utter laziness. Yeah.
Okay.
Ironic because Haskell is a lazy language.
Yeah. 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 But what I find funny is you mentioned that the Haskell community kind of brought you into the space, but at some
Yeah.
point you were actually the first CDO for the Haskell Foundation, right?
Yeah. So that
Uh,
happened really quickly. So
yeah. That.
I due to my training in Scala and with folks like, Tony Morris and Ed Kmet, helping me out and basically being mentors for how I develop programs. And then later, Stuart, uh,
Mhm.
and folks like Will and Lars on the team, they are just incredible programmers, and they were wonderful mentors. And I think I did really well, really quickly under their guidance, to the point where, within the first, I think, 2 or 3 years, I had released something like 20 or 30 independent libraries, just on my own, as an open source developer, as contributions to the community. And then further, application development and library development really seemed to click. And at that point, I was sort of like telling other people how they need to get their shit together. And in particular, one guy who happened to exit the community at a really crucial time, I was able to kind of step in and play lead for maintaining his packages and distributing them to various people who cared. Um, and it seemed like at that point, I had a feel for managing Haskell people specifically within the Haskell community to get them to do things that were in everyone's best interest. And at that point, I was contacted by a few different people, in particular, folks like Tim Sears and Simon Peyton Jones and Richard Eisenberg, who are all sort of very early on in this concept about whether or not there should be funding for the Haskell ecosystem to do projects like what we had already been doing, and sort of like pay people to organize things that benefited the community. Um, and at that point, and this is in like 2020, I think. Yeah, 2020. I started to chair what was then known as the Haskell Foundation Working Group, working to raise money with Tim and working to build out the various sort of organizational fiddly bits with other people who were working on the project, and leading the sort of volunteer effort to get the website up and the corporate structure up, and also us to a point where we could launch in November of that year. And then at that point, I was expecting to be something like the executive director of this nonprofit that we had created, but they had chosen somebody else who could focus on the fundraising aspect specifically, and decided to grant me the CTO role of that
Okay.
foundation, so I could help steer Haskell in a technical direction that we had kind of decided would be
Hmm.
best. And for a year and change, so it was actually roughly 2 years that I was working with the Haskell Foundation. For that latter year, I was doing it in a formal capacity as an executive for the foundation. Um, yeah, but
Yeah.
after around a year, I decided, you know, I'd had enough politics. So
Okay.
I decided, Stuart always had the door open to come back. I did leave Kadena for roughly a year in order to get this done.
Okay.
Uh,
I was
and
asking how you were managing both, but okay, I got it. So
yeah,
you left Kadena.
I had to take actual time off to do the CTO thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
We got the foundation to a point where it was kind of self-driving, and then I said, okay, I'm coming back to Kadena, and I can apply my skills, back at Kadena and build a team specifically for Pact.
And yeah, now you're the lead for the Pact
Yeah,
language.
and it's a
Can
lot of
you?
fun.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that fun. What? what is that you have to do for Kadena in terms of the Pact language, and what are kind of your functions in your day to day life in Kadena?
Uh, okay, so we cover a few different places. On one hand, we have the language written in Haskell, the underlying interpreter, the built-ins, and providing sort of native functions for people to interact with as they write smart contracts in the syntax that defines Pact, right? Um, so working on the language itself. Two, we work on the Pact service as it integrates with Chainweb. Now, this is the sort of transaction execution layer,
Hmm.
as well as the checkpointer and the various sort of like mempool interactions that are required for the Pact service to run. And then three, we manage the smart contracts that define Kadena's sort of root namespace contracts that we provide for everyone for
Yeah.
free. Things like the coin contract. Stuart and I, as well as He Kuhn and a few others, wrote the first coin contract. And then subsequent updates came from Stuart, myself, um, other folks like He Kuhn, and um, in various iterations. So I think we're up to like V5 now, where we just fix little
Hmm.
bugs, and we at every fork we kind of just make sure that we're back compatible, and we have sort of like a very optimal implementation and that kind of thing, right? So we maintain the secure and the optimal smart form of the smart contract that defines the
Okay.
coin. Two, we also manage things like the namespace contract. So if organizations, you'll start seeing things like cadex dot some module dot whatever. Um, that namespace cadex is something that we manage, sort of like an ENS, um,
Hmm.
where people can. Uh, right now, people have to kind of come to us and say, "Hey, I want this namespace," and we say, "Okay, we'll reserve it for you with our credentials," and then pass on the ownership of the namespace to that person. We are working on automating this, so it is going to be decentralized in the future. But
That's cool.
right
That's
now,
something I wanted to talk about as well, because it's what community always bugs us about. Like, oh, but if Kadena
yeah,
has to authorize, it's not decentralized, and I'm like, yeah, but they're working on automate that, I believe. And so, how far do you think that is right now?
that'll be here in a month.
Okay, 1 month.
I'm working on it right now. So
You know, this will be published. Now you gotta keep it.
it will be. It will be. No, we've
Okay.
committed to it for the next fork. So
Okay.
um, that one was definitely a wart that we didn't realize we were going to run into so many problems with time and ability to rotate ownership of those particular namespaces as quickly as we did. So right now we're trying to work on a way of just people getting their own namespaces. So
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, from all of this that you're telling me, anything that you're working on right now that you're particularly excited about?
yeah, so there's a bunch of cool stuff. Um, so one of the things that I was brought on to do as lead for Pact is lead Pact. Um, Go figure, right?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
So historically, we've had an ecosystem in Pact, which consists of, I think, like one or two development environments. We have a REPL, the language itself, and then various things like maybe Chainweaver's built-in IDE or something where
Hmm.
you can deploy and dry run smart contracts right there from the wallet, which is a fantastic little tool. But um, Pact itself was written in a way that was very quick to delivery and didn't really consider from its inception a design which would be geared towards external tooling. So this is really important because if you're building a language, you want people to use the language. And you have to think about tooling from the get go in order to, you know, make the development experience actually uh, pleasant for people who are writing these smart contracts. So think like Solidity has things like truffle and
Mhm.
various like LSP implementations and nice syntax highlighting. All these things go into a language that people want to write, that they can familiarize themselves with and learn and execute within. So we are working on a kind of V2 of the language right now. And I dropped something in like 2020, maybe 2019, I think. No, it was 2020, where I was working with Polkadot to try and get something called Pact Core uh,
Mhm.
on the Kusama chain. I think it was. We were going to have a parachain, and we were going to interact with it, and you know that would be our integration with Polkadot, right? You could run Pact
Mhm.
programs on Polkadot. But one of the requirements that they had for us was like it has to fit in a certain tiny amount of memory. It was like 100 kilobytes or something like that,
Mhm.
and it has to compile down to WASM at the end of the day. And we were looking at the language and going, "There's no way. There's no actual way we can do that." Um, Not only because Haskell is gigantic, but also because the interpreter is so entangled with the rest of the language that it actually wasn't feasible from an engineering perspective without rewriting a lot of the components of the language.
Mhm.
Um, so I ended up writing this long, like 10-page paper about what that would look like if we did it. And Polkadot accepted it. So technically, we are still, in grant phase with Polkadot, and whenever they
For
want us to,
Kusama,
yeah, yeah,
still for
yeah.
Kusama, yeah.
And I wanted to implement that in particular, which was basically um, a surface syntax distinct from a core, what we call a core language, which was a sort of minified version of the language that could be run through a very small interpreter. And these interpreters only need to be like 100 lines long, and the core only needs to be like 5 or 6 constructors. So you can have a very concise language that your language compiles down into, that is then interpreted in different phases. That would allow us to basically not only uh, fix the sort of entanglement problem with the language, but also run a more optimal interpreter on any chain we decide to integrate with, but also one that fits into a very small amount of space. So thinking about this, I came up with this idea, and I gave it to my friend Jose right before I, I exited to do the CTO role for Haskell Foundation. He picked this up and started implementing it in his spare time. So the absolute hero of Pact right now is currently a guy named Jose Cardona, who is a good friend of mine from way back in the Scala days, actually, who we picked up for Kadena um, due to him also going into Haskell in a similar trajectory, but also being very friendly and very good person, who I could sort of, attest to directly. Um, and yeah, he's just started implementing, uh, you know, not from the paper, just sort of independently. We had kind of like gamed out a few things in a separate public repo on my GitHub, and he just started implementing stuff. And we're finding that as we implement this packed core idea, we can probably get like a 30x performance increase
Mhm.
in the actual language interpretation phase. But also, because we can separate the language implementation out into separate phases. So things like going from syntax to like a term language, into core, into a linting phase, into an interpretation phase. We can hook different APIs in at different points and
Mhm.
allow tooling to query whatever they need to query.
Okay.
So toolers can write linters, custom linters for the new language. Toolers have a fixed grammar, which is very fast to parse. They have an interpreter that is very small and very performant. Um, and we are looking at things like an LSP, which is now much easier to work with, which is Microsoft's language server protocol, which basically is like a Rosetta Stone for any IDE that can run it, to just take care of tooling overnight, basically. uh, So I'm working on that with him. He is doing 99.999% of the work, uh, just as a shout out. Um, so that's something I'm particularly excited about. Two, we are working on specifying Pact from a formal perspective. So things like, if you know about Michikok for Tezos or Plutus, they are formally verified languages
Hmm.
in the sense that they have a denotational semantic that people can run and prove to themselves that their every step of their program is going to be sound.
Hmm.
We are building one for Pact.
Okay.
A recent hire from ICP, I think we grabbed ICP's principal architect, uh, John Wigley. We have him working on our formal specification for Pact right now, and he has been fixing bugs, and he has once we get a reference interpreter out in his cock code, we can sort of transpile immediately to things like, you know, OCaml or perhaps Rust, perhaps Wasm,
Oh,
and also
okay.
target Haskell. So we're gonna have a lot of support coming in the next year for various languages, not just Haskell.
And so
Um,
for those kind of two things that you're excited about, do you have any kind of timelines?
um, None that I can commit to right now. Pact Core is end of year for sure.
For sure.
Um, I can't say September or October because I would have to check with Jose, but for sure end of year.
And how much will developers need to adapt to that, or will
None.
everything just none?
Everything will run.
Okay.
But in addition to this, also one point I forgot to make. Um, we are listening to the community when they say Lisp sucks to write in. So we are providing an alternative syntax, which is more Pythonic, which people
Okay.
can also write in addition to the Lisp syntax, if
Okay.
they prefer. And then at some point in the future, if there's a critical mass of Pythonic smart contracts, we'll probably look at deprecating the Lisp syntax.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think some people will be sad to hear that. Some will be very happy.
Yes, the two
um,
people will be sad about the Lisp.
yeah. Okay. Let's maybe talk a little bit about Kuro. Um,
Kuro,
so
yeah,
it's yeah. So people were very excited about Kuro because community has made a lot of claims about TPS and how
right.
I'm sure you've seen all of the memes and the stuff, but essentially, I believe you need Kuro for that kind of maximum transactional power, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So the idea was like on every chain you would hook up a Kuro, which granted you a sort of L2 transactional settlement layer, which you could then just sort of post to the chains, right?
yeah, exactly.
Um,
Uh,
yeah.
what I was kind of trying to find out with you is, in terms of development of Kuro, how far is it? How far ahead is it? And how much do you think developers need to wait before they can really dig in and start using it in their dApps?
Yeah. So we do hear people asking for an up to date Kuro. And we have had some internal discussions between a few of us about what it would take. And I have actually a PR up on the Kuro GitHub taking a look at getting the build up to date and what it would take. And it doesn't seem to be like a ton of work. The problem is finding man hours and time to do it. So currently, there is an appetite in Kadena to actually do this. Whether or not we can find the time is going to be determined by the level of priority that we are
Hmm.
given for tasks for the next kill switch. Um, and I think discussing it with folks like Jay Quinn, um, we can find probably some time to update it between now and the next kill switch. Well, probably not September, but probably just after that, we can probably dedicate some time to it.
Okay.
It doesn't take like it's not a big job, but it is a job. It is a job where we have to update some like serialization formats, which if you're a developer, uh, it is a scary prospect. And it's a lot of bumping dependencies, but it's not so dusty that we can't, dust it off and things won't work. It's that we want it up to date.
Okay.
And we can definitely do that. So we'll we're going to start prioritizing that hopefully after September.
Okay. Okay. That's good to hear as well. I guess end of year is bringing a lot of cool stuff. It seems.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff coming.
Okay.
Which, we're a little bit more, in on what's happening than the general community, which I realize is sort of pull based, or sorry, rather push based. But we see a lot of really good things coming out. So we're all hyped, but we're at a mismatch with the community right now because
I
everyone's
think one of the critics that community would give, and it's sort of in that line, is that there's not a lot of marketing coming.
right.
So and maybe that's why people are a bit in the dark. Yeah, I know you're not you're mainly on the dev side of things, but can you give us your perspective on why marketing is on the low, and do you think that that will change once all of these implementations come?
Yeah. So I think there's a question about whether or not it's going to make a difference. Why market in a bear market? That's the
Can
thing
I
to
can
approach.
I just sure?
Go
But
for it.
on the bull market, there was the marketing as well. So
That's
true.
fair. Well,
That's true.
I wouldn't say that. I would say we did market, but we did not market. Uh, we put a lot into community building, as opposed
Okay.
to sort of general. Hey, we're releasing X, Y, Z.
Hmm.
Um, but again, I'm not a marketer, so I
I know.
don't know whether or not we can do something better or if we're just kind of completely inept. I don't know. Um, but I can say that since inception, and release, the state that we were in 2019 and 2020 was we weren't interfacing with any communities aside from sort of syndicated publications. But now, as I look at the sort of marketing landscape today, I see posts every day or every other day to the point where I have to shut off the Kadena Discord announcements channel. Um, we have a Twitter page which is constantly posting, which has 250,000 followers at this point, compared to 10,000 when we launched. Um, we have tons of people talking on places like Telegram and 4chan, and yeah, we can do a little bit more outreach in terms of some of those communities, but I do see a steady improvement in viewer. Uh, what's the word for giving attention? I
I'm
don't
not.
remember the
I
word.
don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
in
Yeah, but
engagement from
engagement.
the
Okay.
community, to the point
Okay.
where people are sort of digesting our notifications and our announcements and things, and they're just like, okay, what's next? And then they have to wait a day, and it seems like there's a lot less than there is. Um, you go to the Kadena Discord right now, and let's see, there's a we had a thing yesterday. We had a thing the day before, the day before that, the day before that, the day before that, 2 days before, 4 days before that. Okay,
Yeah.
so we had a 3 day period where we didn't post anything. So I think when you look at other communities, so people like Cardano, they have a lot more people shouting a lot more things. And Kadena is still relatively small as an ecosystem. And we don't have people or projects that can fill that gap yet. Um, I see the marketing situation getting much better as projects come to fruition and launch and continue to get grants and that kind of thing from our
Hmm.
ecosystem fund, who can, we can shout as well. So things like, CADX or KDA Bets or DNA, the Marmalade folks, uh,
KDLounge and KDSwap.
yeah, KD Launch, KD Swap, Babena. It could all, uh, contribute to this, you know,
Of
critical
course.
mass of marketing stuff. I would challenge the idea that folks like Cardano are putting out updates constantly and marketing constantly. I think it's everyone else who's doing it. If you look at their shills and you look at their projects, they're doing a ton of the marketing. Um,
Yeah, but I mean, like a year and a half ago, there were no projects there as well,
yeah,
and they were already very high in market cap, and that's something that I. So yeah, but I don't want to digress too much, but it's something a little bit weird.
yeah,
But let's not go into that route. So, but I actually agree a lot with you on the ecosystem stance that when we have more applications, it will be a lot easier to get attention from people, right? Because in essence, what brings people to an ecosystem, it's their apps, right? It's what people
exactly.
want.
What are
So I
people
think
doing?
that's and do you see us, or in this case, Kadena, going to like a top 10 contender on market cap if we have this ecosystem blooming, like in the next bull run, maybe in 2 or 3 years?
Top 10? That's going to be really difficult. I could see that in the next 5 years. Um, Conservatively, but I also can't predict the future. We did go to 30 way faster than we were anticipating.
Oh,
Um,
Kadena went to top 30 at some point.
no, we went to like $30, like
Oh,
$28
okay,
to be
28,
specific.
28. Yeah.
Um, we did end up, I think, max something like top 40 or 40, 42 or 43, I think maybe.
Mm,
So it is possible. It is definitely going to be a situation where in the bull run, we have to have people delivering and we have to show that, yes, the blockchain can handle project development and people, we do bring uh, a valid sort of market value into the industry, and people can use us to build their their solutions. Uh, that remains to be proven. I think before it was probably a lot of speculation, but now we're starting to see with the ecosystem fund and with a few projects actually delivering, like CADX in 7 days here. We'll start seeing more and more interest and more buyers and um, uh, more interaction with the community as well.
yeah,
Um, I could see us being top 10, absolutely. If not top 10, top 20 for sure. You know.
yeah. Let's go there.
Um, Now, one of the things you mentioned, things like high market cap from the beginning. A lot of the time, this is because people raise a ridiculous amount of money from VC and
Hmm.
have these gigantic market making contracts to start before they even launch. So, like Cardano famously kind of did this. Um, we do not want a situation where we accept VC funds and end up beholden to our VCs, uh, who can then sort of rug pull on everyone in the community. We are more organic than that. We are looking for organic growth and we are looking for actual development and minimizing the risk to the end consumer, who wants to invest in the Kadena project.
Uh, I think
Um,
that kind of stems from the fact that Kadena is a proof of work
right.
consensus mechanism, right? So in a proof of stake, you need to raise funds somehow. So you kind of sell the tokens at first, and on Kadena, it was a fair distribution for the most part. So I think that's where it comes. Speaking of proof of work and proof of stake, do you have any thoughts on that? How do you feel about?
I I think there's a mismatch in incentive between proof of stake chains that raise through VC funds and the fact that the richest people in the network control the liquidity in the network. I don't like, yes, it is a wonderful sort of greener solution to certain problems, but you end up in a case where VC and folks who are buying in uh, really don't contribute that much and are just kind of like waiting for the opportune moment to exit with, you know, as much money as possible. Whereas in a decentralized network, it's a little harder to to get like a mining farm started up. You actually have hardware invested in the project. You have man hours in terms of the ASIC design that you actually fronted money to get, um, and anyone can enter if they have those skills,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
they can take out a loan or something. Um, I think proof of stake scares me. because of that.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any truly successful proof of stake projects yet, despite the hype. I have seen very success, and by successful I mean long-term, secure uh, projects in the same vein as something like a Bitcoin or an XMR, or even something like Litecoin. Um, but I have seen proof of work stand the test of time and stand the test of security. Um, and Kadena focuses on being a really efficient implementation of proof of work. So I think, as far as like, whether or not we're contributing to the heat death of the earth is debatable. We are a green chain. We are notably one of the greenest, if not the greenest, proof of work chain in existence, according to like CryptoWhisper. Um, and we provide incentives for people mining with green energy. We are proud to sort of fund that kind of work. Um, so I don't see a long term problem for us in this sense. I see a
Okay.
problem for proof of stake every
Yeah.
single time
Yeah.
because of those
I agree.
incentives. Our incentives
I
are
agree.
right on.
I agree. I agree with you. And to really make the point for Kadena, I think what we need to just finalize with is like there's other layer ones that use Haskell based languages, right?
Yeah.
Uh, how do you feel that Pact as an advantage or disadvantage with the other competitors in the market?
Uh, um, so for one, we have a not a novel, but a very sort of like battle tested set of features that we derive specifically from studying other languages. So things like, for example, Plutus um, existed around the same time as Solidity, and were in development with a fixed feature set, with a fixed sort of idea about how the world should be according to 6 or 7 years ago. Pact has been in continuous development in terms of its semantics and feature set, and real world sort of production testing for the past 3 or 4. So I think, while I do respect other, Haskell projects in the ecosystem, and I definitely see their value for Haskell, the language, just looking at the general sort of state of how people have been able to integrate, for instance, DeFi with those languages, and seeing the very negative feedback that we have not experienced, um, I think that Pact kind of wins in that sense. We take feedback from real world people with real world problems instead of trying to specify everything before it goes out into production and then finding out that nothing works. So for us, I think we're in a very good position.
Okay, but something that comes along with what you're saying, like Pact is on constant development, right? At some
Mhm,
point, you need to stabilize it, right? So, for example, I'm creating a protocol, and people want it to be safe, so they want me to relinquish ownership of the smart contract, right?
mhm.
But if Pact keeps getting updates, I cannot do that right now, right?
Right,
So,
right.
my application tomorrow wouldn't work, and I couldn't do anything about it. Do you think that at some point you'll have like a stable version, and you won't need to do anything, and we kind of get the full decentralized experience from that?
I think so. I think so, yes. And I think that will come with Pact Core. Um, uh, the only thing we've really been doing in Pact for the past 6 months has mostly just been bug fixes and adding additive features. So things like principal accounts, like K accounts, and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as like breaking changes go, things that like really fundamentally change the language, I don't think we've seen that many, if any, this year. Um,
Something about cross chain transfers at some point.
oh, right, right. Okay, yeah. So there was that's a smart contract problem, less a language problem. I
Hmm.
think we
Yeah.
added an additional interface which gave you an event for cross-chain
Mm.
transfers, which is slightly different. That, yes, we plan on stabilizing the coin contract Um, Going after this one, actually, we plan on not having any changes to the coin contract unless absolutely necessary, because we
Okay.
do realize we have been listening to you guys, and we say, okay, we've been forking a little bit much, but we've gotten up to the fifth iteration, and we feel it's a very stable contract. We probably don't need any more on that end. Now we can just focus on making sure the language is optimal, and uh, once I think namespaced
Is
principal namespaces goes in, we should be all done in terms of features for the most part.
good. That's very good to hear. But I do understand that you don't want to settle for something that it's not there yet. So,
Yeah,
uh,
if it's just wrong, it's just wrong.
yeah, doesn't
It's
make
better
sense.
to fix it earlier.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Let's jump to NFTs real quick.
Yeah.
So Marmalade, um,
Mm.
Marmalade. So there's been some. I've heard some community members, or developers in this case, asking where is Marmalade, but at the same time, someone is replying that it's done. Can you give us some context in that? Is it
Yeah, yeah.
finished?
So, okay, here's a distinction that will not make the community happy. um, all of the necessary infrastructure for Marmalade has been live for months. We're working on making the dev experience more friendly, providing sort of like abstractions and working with people to get them the abstractions that they need, as well as sort of example code that people can not cargo cult, but work into a shape that best fits their use case. But we're also working on documentation for Marmalade, as well as getting the JavaScript front end uh, up to a usable point where we can sort of give this to community and say, hey, look, this is for everyone of any expertise level. Um, but building on Marmalade, because we don't have these things available already, or they're partially done, is still an expert level dev experience. So you
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
dig into it and you can learn the smart contracts, but it is not quite at a
Hard.
point where we're happy with um, people just, you know, and people can just have it, right? So we
Yeah.
want to make sure that when we deliver something, it is both professional and accessible, as well as useful. And the usefulness is being worked on. The professionalism is part of the polish that comes from interacting with people who are doing sort of like very early dev, as well as the accessibility part, which is coming in the form of documentation and JavaScript
Okay.
libraries that interface with it.
Okay.
So on the way, already here, but in like a polished phase.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
More
where we're at.
documentation and easier experience for developers. That's good.
But yeah, you can go and take a look at the contracts already. And we already have people who are working through the contracts who have raised, for instance, KIPs, Kadena Improvement Process initiatives. If anyone wants to go and see the KIP GitHub repository, people have been logging issues and questions that have been very good that I or other people are answering, um, having to do with Marmalade specifically, actually.
Okay.
So if you want to get in on those discussions, feel free to raise an issue or comment on any of the open issues.
We'll
Uh,
leave the link in the description for people who want to jump in and
yeah,
see what's going on there. So, what's your opinion on NFTs, and particularly in Kadena? What kind of value do you think they can add to people in general?
right. So I get NFTs. I think they're fantastic ways of representing things like luxury good attestation, or like art or other collections, even things like real estate, right, where there may not be a concrete uh, you know number associated with the property. Um, Whether or not I think they're a good thing is entirely a separate conversation. I think those use cases are fantastic. Um, and I think Kadena is working on uh, bringing, let's see, so bringing projects that can really make use of the NFT concept that aren't just like crypto meme, monkey
Eight
nonsense.
8-bit images, right?
Yeah, I don't care about shitty meme apes or people just like, hey, look, I minted an NFT and it's my terrible CGI art or something like that. I want to use NFTs for what they're actually intended for, which is things that are sort of like physical goods that maybe don't have a concrete, uh, you know, dollar sign associated with them, things that are not necessarily fungible. Um, and I would like to avoid all the nonsensical meme markets, or at least if somebody does do it, it's not the Kadena team.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. You
so
can't help that other people uh, build, and they have,
yeah,
and so far it's been successful. So that's good at least.
like we honestly have one of the best NFT platforms in the business right now. We are very low on gas. It is not difficult to mint. Artists can put their works up as needed with very low fees, which is a fantastic bar to set for other NFT projects. You go to something like Ethereum, where it costs hundreds of dollars just to mint a particular NFT. We don't do that,
Hmm.
and we're more performant. And you can do it uh, with a series of primitives that eventually will be launched, and people will be able to just you know build on it. But we're focused on bringing a new platform and a new way of doing NFTs that isn't just going to be cookie cutter with the rest of the industry, right?
Nice, nice.
So where is Marmalade? In a good place. It's currently being polished,
Okay,
but you can look at it right now and get started if you wanted to build on it. So
okay,
it's
okay.
just you're not going to have a lot of help, or if you do want help, you can talk to one of
You
us.
gotta
So
hit the head on the wall a lot of times.
right, right.
So, and
Um,
to speak to you, the best way is that kips that you were talking about, right? Or
that's if you have particular initiatives you actually want to talk
mhm.
to us about. So things like commenting on what the polyfungible standards should be. So think like the ERC process.
Okay,
That's KIPS for us.
okay, okay.
Um, but and actually, somebody actually made a wonderful issue talking about NFTs. I think it was the Kitty Cat folks
Hmm.
talking about how we can sort of like split our interfaces out into sort of supplementary event-driven interfaces that people can
Hmm.
opt into as opposed to being part of the main contract and that kind of thing, which
Okay,
really helped our thinking on whether or not we should split certain features out as uh, a point of principle. Um, and that's
shout
an
out to the
ongoing
kitty
discussion.
cats team.
Yeah, shout out to kitty cats. I love the art. As much as I just said, I hate the fucking meme apes. I love adorable things. So good job. Um, yeah. So feel free if you want help. The Discord is probably the best place to do it. The team uh, has been trying to get more involved with that, but you can imagine 2,000 people, 90% of which are perhaps a little weird, uh, hitting us up for help in various different ways. I got burnt out with it very quickly. So if you want, PM me or at me in the Pact channels and just say, hey, I got a problem. Can we take it to DM or something? And I'm happy to work with you.
Awesome,
Um,
awesome.
but scale is difficult. There's lots of people that can help. We're always
Yeah,
happy to.
yeah. That's good to hear. So, to just to wrap it up, a personal opinion of yours would be cool on the ecosystem as a whole. So, how have you seen the Kadena ecosystem grow?
I,
Were you expecting it to be faster, slower?
I was expecting it to be a little faster, but I think we learned. I think it's actually a really good thing that we took our time, and we got maybe a year of just fixing things and listening to people's feedback before we actually started going up. Um, we fixed so many bugs and avoided so many problems in those years when we were kind of under the radar that we really got to lock down our systems and our smart contracts and our ways of thinking about things like the language and marketing and how to build out our ecosystem that I honestly wouldn't have it any other way. These are very important years where kind of sucks a little bit to be a Kadena investor at first. But if you were on very early, when we were at like 7 cents. Uh, you're very happy now. And likewise, I've seen us go from 50 cents to 7 cents to 30 cents to $2, and
That's
we're
pretty
kind
good,
of
right?
hovering here. And to be honest, that's a net improvement of roughly 20%, or sorry, 200%. No, not 200%. I'm dumb.
From
20x.
50?
Sorry.
From 7 cents?
uh, yeah, from 7 cents.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm
2,000.
like,
Yeah.
all right, we carry this on for another year or two, maybe with some better growth curves, or maybe some better constant factors, and we're looking at a very solid foundation for everything. We've got a solid platform, we've got a solid language. With our ecosystem fund is really focusing on solid projects, and we're fit to deliver. End of year this year and all of next year, and that's going to be our year, timed perfectly for the bear, or sorry,
The
the
bull.
bull market. So I think things are going to be very, very positive here in the next year and a half to 2 years, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
I am too. I am too. I think there's a lot of stuff coming. Still a lot of stuff that I want to see coming to Kadena, and that's kind of what I wanted to ask you as well. Is there any project that you would love to see on Kadena that you can compare with other chains,
With other chains, hmm,
or that you don't see anywhere and you think it would be cool to have on Kadena?
let's see. So I would really like to dunk on Vitalik and get us ZK rollups and all the fun zero knowledge stuff. And we've already started working with a lab to do that. So I think I posted something on Twitter like
Electron,
2 minutes ago. Yeah, Electron Labs. So we
Electron.
we got really stoked on the idea that, oh wait, Kuro can be a fun layer too, but also uh, if we wanted to get ZK stuff, we're actually at a prime point where we can get rollups integrated with the blockchain, or at least the primitives needed to start integrating things like rollups with the blockchain.
Can
So
you,
we're
sorry, for the people who have no idea what that is, can you give us a little bit of a context what ZK rollups are?
yeah, think about batched transactions and evidence of those transactions succeeding.
Okay.
So if I were to execute 100 transactions off chain, but I wanted to prove the fact that they were in fact executed and store that in just a small hash and
Hmm.
throw that on chain, that would be the idea of what ZK rollups can do. And
Okay.
the whole zero knowledge part is kind of like the how do you build that hash in such a way that other people can kind of uh,
Trusted.
validate it without messing with the initial conditions,
Hmm.
and prove that those transactions actually did in fact happen. Um, so it's just a way of getting over the fact that, so for instance, Ethereum was trying to do this for a very long time. Vitalik had written tons of stuff about it, and it just wasn't feasible, except it is feasible in Kadena. We just have the infrastructure ready for it, actually, so we could just
Nice.
roll out with it and start working on it. So I'm
Nice.
happy
Nice.
about that.
Okay, and that's a good note to end. Future beating of Vitalik. That would be nice.
Yes.
Emily, thanks a lot for joining me
Yeah.
and for giving us all these amazing timelines. I'm excited for the end of year. It seems that a lot is coming. Anything you wanted to share with the community? Any links or any other stuff that you would like to share with them?
Uh, I think just a few in terms of where you can find us,
Hmm.
and the various repos that maybe people weren't aware of. There's, if you look at the Kadena IO GitHub, there's the KIPS repo, there's Marmalade, there's Pact and Pact models. The Chainwhip node is up there. If you wanted to take a look at the community scripts, and maybe, because they do need love, maybe do a little open source work if you're looking to get familiar with the Kadena ecosystem. There are the Kadena community repos on GitHub.
Okay.
Just search for Kadena community. There's lots of good stuff there. Some of it's out of date because we've been busy, but if anyone wants to pick those up, you are absolutely free. And the less you rely on us, the better,
The better.
because we are busy.
Okay.
um, but we are happy to help guide any of that stuff. You know where to find our Telegram, our Discord, our Twitter. Um, my handle has changed for Twitter. It is now at Waffle Pirate. Um,
Okay.
and yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, it was a pleasure having you here, and I'm sure we'll get the chance to do this again later
Thank you.
to check up on all of the cool stuff that are now live on Kadena in the future.
I'm happy to do this anytime. I love giving
Okay.
podcasts and updates and things. And if you
Awesome.
can't get one of like Stuart or Will, feel free to just hit me up.
Okay, I will. I will. Thanks, and see you later, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.